Black Knight D-Day. My name is Daniel Vallis from InformedChristians.com, a website ministry devoted to discerning current events from a Christian perspective. I just want to give a quick shout out again to all those who send in tips, leave their comments, leave their feedback and thoughts. It is really helpful, and it gives me new perspective on things that sometimes I may already know, I don't know, and it just helps really contribute to what we're trying to research and gain a better understanding of the time. And I greatly appreciate that you are watching too as well. This material is a warning. It's not a prediction. We must not let our guard down. We have heard the calls for peace and safety. That means sudden destruction is coming. We should not hang our hats on a particular date. We should just consider them as markers and fluid dates. So we don't give a prediction, but we are giving a warning that sudden destruction is coming. We've been looking at the Black Knight Decoded short film that Pepsi put out with all the strong symbolism that was in it and how it has continued to roll forward, and not just at the release date. There seems to be other referencing and more tie-in, and that's what we're going to examine today. Trying to get a big picture of where does this fit into the overall message, and is there more to the message in light of considering the bigger message? Because of a lot of connections that I've seen, I've been looking and studying it more. In our short video the other day, we talked about the title and the appearance of three. And I've mentioned it many times before that my degree is in advertising and public relations. And so when I tell you things are done very deliberately in media, that is because it's true. And everything is done on purpose. Media directors are some of the most OCD people that you could imagine. Everything is done on purpose in high dollar media. So as I've been looking at it more, I've been looking more for the tiny details that I would notice. And I noticed on her shirt the other day of the little girl, it says, "I'm off to the," and it implies the stars from what you can read there. And as you watch the short film, you could see prominent notice to the stars throughout as well. Again, going with the whole UFO alien theme again, but her shirt is not accidental. And then of course we talked about how the backwards E appears to be a 3, and just with simple rearranging of it, it appears to give us the message of December 30th, D. And we've gotten a lot of feedback from different people what they think that means. And one that I'm going to settle on just because it seems to fit the message flow is D-Day. And that seems to be the overall consensus anyway. But D-Day, just looking it up, military designation of days and hours. D-Day is the unnamed day on which an operation commences or is due to commence. This may be the commencement of hostilities or any other operation. In other words, it's a fluid date of when things are going to commence and start. Another way to put it would be that the term D-Day is when a combat attack or operation is to be initiated. They designate the day and hour of the operation when the day and hour have not yet been determined or where secrecy is essential. So in other words, it's a fluid date. When you're doing all your planning, you designate a D-Day, but it may change by plus or minus. And that's what I've been reminding people is we should look at the days and any markers that are given as only that, markers. They're not definitive, they are signs for that general area. And that's how we should approach the December 30th. Approach it as a D-Day. It's not a date set in stone. It can vary plus or minus, but it does seem to designate a time and a period around when a major operation is going to be initiated. We've been seeing ever since the beginning of the year, Satan messaging his disciples, basically pushing them and getting ready toward this day. And we've looked at that in our video, Enemy Action, and other videos since then. But they've been literally getting ready all this year for D-Day. And it appears that we are very close to when they expect that to happen. Because of all the symbolism that we've seen in the Black Knight Decoded and how it ties in with so much other stuff that we've talked about before, I did some more digging. On the PepsiCo website, who's the parent company, they have a little bit more information that I did not know before. And they talk about the global short film with footage shot from outer space with a Earthcast camera on the International Space Station. I did not know that. So in other words, some of those high altitude, way back shots that they included in the short film, they're claiming that they were shot from the high definition cameras on the International Space Station. And of course, they also talk about the thousands of fans from 11 different countries around the world that were brought together to participate as part of the Pepsi Challenge. And I've been hammering this home. This is not some small short film. thousands of people were involved in this. And when you look at the credits that roll at the end for several minutes, and you see the scope of this, and here they even say that it took place from 11 different countries. Of course, the 11 is very symbolic, but this was not some cheap, quick film that they threw together. A lot of money has gone into this messaging, and the timing of it. It's very, very deliberate, and so we should not dismiss it. It was done on purpose. A lot of money was put into this messaging, and it was released at a certain time for a certain reason, because it's reinforcing the other messaging they've already been giving the rest of the year, pointing toward a D-Day to finally get ready and basically announce that they were approaching the end mile marker. And I believe the December 22nd and December 25th were major last-minute mile markers that basically any day now after those points is going to be the D-Day. And of course, like they were touting, some of their imagery was shot from the International Space Station. And they also talked about how the synchronized driving of the cars, that was one shot that was shot from the International Space Station. And they also mentioned that this synchronized driving broke a world record too. A lot of effort went into all of these shots. A lot of effort, a lot of money. But that raised some red flags when they started talking about how the International Space Station was involved in some of the footage in this. Because I don't trust NASA at all, and I've seen so much deception coming from them, I don't trust them at all. So the fact that NASA is involved in this Pepsi short film too as well should be raising some serious red flags, if it hadn't been already. And basically, I would call bologna sandwiches on anything having to do with NASA, basically. And then I happened to find out that there is a Black Knight Decoded behind the scenes film. And there you'll find a link in the description box to that. It doesn't reveal much, but it does give you a behind the scenes look at some of the shots and realize the money that they've put into this somewhat. And they give you some shots of the sets where they were working, getting all set up, and just other unique perspectives that you don't quite get in the film. And of course, we talked much before about the importance of spirals as gateways. They have different interviews with the actors, and these are not some small actors either. That's David here. He's a Grammy-nominated actor. Usher's in here as well. The director was wearing an interesting shirt alluding to being lost in space, and possibly also concepts from this series Lost. But there are other shots that kind of reaffirmed what I said before, that I don't think there were specific markers in it pointing toward Christmas other than the new moon, which seemed to be a very strong tie. So they're tying to the concepts of Christmas time with the Nimrod and all that, and Apollo, Apollyon. But the overall messaging is not pointing toward that, because it's not limited to that. It's a broader message to this whole time. It's a D-Day. They spent some good amount of money. Now, when they got to Frida, she made a very interesting comment in the clip that I'm going to play here now.
I think it is definitely going to appeal to the new generation. For those who don't know, I think the surprise will be that there is a conspiracy theory called the Black Knight.
Very interesting statement to make in a behind the scenes. Even in the behind the scenes, continuing the same idea and push that aliens are real. Aliens are not real. And let me just say right now, the Black Knight thing in space is not real either. That's part of the NASA deception, alien deception. It's not real. It's not there. Don't buy into any part of the Black Knight deception, because that's the direction they're pushing. They are deliberately trying to evoke and build up curiosity in people to research that. It's all completely bogus, though. Completely. And they're doing this on purpose to build up interest, leading toward a very soon D-Day disclosure. But I find it very interesting that they even reinforce that even in the behind-the-scenes video. And they show some brief clips from this behind-the-scenes video in the end credits of the actual short film. So they were created at the same time and together. Now, in the short film, some of the major final scenes take place on top of some of the buildings there in Los Angeles. And we've talked about the importance of that, the City of Angels. But also important reference to the buildings used in the Independence Day films as well. But the helicopter pads by themselves have very symbolic meaning as well. And they make a big deal in the film of emphasizing this particular building, and also the building that harkens to the Apollyon Eye very close to that, which also has a helipad on it too. And it's to evoke mental anchors to other messaging that the audience has seen before. And it's to bring that to the forefront and connect the ideas that they're seeing in this short film to things that they have seen elsewhere. particularly the Independence Day film, which came out years ago, which was all about aliens coming with very bad intentions, and one of the buildings that they toasted happened to be that particular building used in the Pepsi short film. But also in the movie, that building was used as a site where they were trying to message and communicate with the aliens too. So there's a lot of cross symbolism and messaging that is being pulled to the front by evoking these mental anchors. Now, one thing you'll notice if you start looking around Los Angeles, you'll notice that a lot of the tall buildings have helicopter pads on it. A lot of them, they're all over the place. And apparently, it's some type of ordinance there in the city that buildings over a certain amount of height have to have a helipad on it to help with evacuation in case of a fire. And we've seen multiple references recently in the big media pushes that they've been pushing out of the concept of evacuation. They know there's going to be a falling away of the diplomatic corps of Christ's soldiers and children, those who are faithfully watching and serving him where they should be, just like the wise virgins. There is going to be an evacuation, and so they're weaving in this to allow their messaging as well. So in this one film, they have the concepts of alien contact juxtaposed with the very idea of evacuation too as well, because they know they're going to be happening almost at the exact same time. Once the falling away takes place, then the man of sin will be revealed. So when we consider the title as December 30th as a D-Day, we can look back at the year and see a lot of messaging over the year that has been pointing toward and getting Satan's forces, so to speak, into position, getting everything finally ready, getting ready for a D-Day, of when they expect, plus or minus a few days, of when things are going to happen. What's the only thing holding them back is the restrainer, the fact that God's diplomatic corps is still here. That's a big thorn in his flesh, and Christ, God, is restraining him from initiating anything until that evacuation takes place. So he has to include that in the messaging because it's part of why things are being delayed. So he's including that to his message to his disciples that, yes, we're waiting for this. This is going to happen. This is part of the D-Day disclosure stuff, but any day now. And so he's pushing his disciples to be ready. Christ has been calling his disciples to be ready. And that's what the heart and prayer of this ministry is. And that's why we share this information, is so you can realize the urgency of the situation, realize how late the hour is, so that you will strive to be ready. So let's look back at the year and look at some of the messaging of how it's tied in directly to this Black Knight decoded film messaging and all that's tied into it, the whole concept of the D-Day. Now in our video, Enemy Actions, we did a good review all the way from January all the way up through October. And I've been doing this whole discernment ministry for almost 14 years, so I've been doing it for quite a while. But only recently in the past month have I switched to primarily focusing on videos, because around October and late September is when things really took off and stood out so much from everything else that I've seen over the previous years. And the only way to convey and really help connect the dots was to start putting into video format and to help you see the big picture of everything that's coming together. So things have really taken off. And since then, in November and December, we've been covering videos almost every day, but you have to go back and watch some of those videos as well. And there's no way I could display all that information on this timeline to make sense as well. But let's look back at a few key points. Back in January, actually it's the turn of the year, was when Pepsi put out its pre-Super Bowl commercial with Katy Perry. And think about this. A year ago, Pepsi released some very important messaging at the start of the year to get and kick off a lot of other messaging that would be connected to that. They kicked it all off to start the messaging. And now we find ourselves a year later almost, and we could see the messaging coming full circle. So back around the turn of the year, Katy Perry released the commercial, talked a lot about time and aliens coming through doorways, particles, prominent push of the red and blue colors. We've talked about all that before, so I'm not going to repeat it all here. But that's when that came out. So that really kicked off the concept of the aliens, alien contact, which of course triggered a whole bunch of other psychological anchors from other alien movies as well. And then kicking off the idea of particles and fireworks connected to it all, and the CERN technology. So then at the beginning of February was the halftime show with Katy Perry. There's a lot of other symbolism in it that we've talked about before and tie-ins to even more stuff. But this is when they really pushed the concept of the beast coming onto the scene, again, via using particles as open doorways That's how the beast comes onto the scene, tied in with Prometheus, Lucifer, and tied in at the same time with the messaging of the falling away, and in conjunction with her song that she sang at the exact same time of her Dark Horse song. So back in January, February is when they started this whole Dark Horse, Dark Knight, Black Knight, using that whole concept, really introducing that, especially with the chess figures. That's when they introduced this. And the whole year up till now has been messaging based off of that. And we're almost completely come full circle. They know they are at D-Day. And we need to wake up and realize they've been getting ready for a long time for the time we find ourselves at now. Time is very short. So all that was at the beginning of the year, and in our video we talked about everything in between. But then in November, on 13, was the Paris attacks, and that was one of the big pushes with a lot of symbolism of the colors, reinforcing the colors again, but then also really kicking off the calls for peace and safety. The events really kicked off that messaging all over the world. We saw that we brought special attention to this. This was different than any other attacks that had just happened recently too. There was something very unique about this date that they were putting extra emphasis on it, and it gave them an excuse to splash basically the Pepsi colors all over the place and signal that, whoa, hey, this is all about to start. Get ready, folks. And they're getting ready because they know Apollo, the sun figure, is getting ready to come onto the scene. So this was one of their final major rallies to get people ready. And just a few hours after that, they did the same messaging on the pyramids. And we've talked about the messaging on the pyramid on the dollar bill. Again, pointing to the America as a phoenix. That'll help usher in their New World Order stuff. But it's also the culmination of things that were started in 1776, which I considered a 5776. And this year is on the Hebrew calendar, 576. And the new moon just a couple days ago was a celestial marker that pointed and harkened back to 1776. So there's a lot of events that are coming together symbolically, prophetically, messaging, and many other aspects too, all coming together now that they've been praying for. The mystery of iniquity has been working toward this time period that we find ourselves at now. And we are on the threshold, literally, of a D-Day. A day of destruction, a day of doom, whatever you want to call it, but it is a D-Day. A day that they've been looking toward and getting ready for a long time. And they know something's sure about it because they've been producing all this messaging. But then, just a few hours after the pyramid event, was this Black Knight decoded film released. Think about that. In context of all this, just mere hours away, it's about 5 days at the most away from the Paris attacks. But the Paris attacks, you have red and blue splashed all over the world. 2 days after that, you have the pyramid lit up in red and blue. And then barely 2 days after that, you have the Black Knight, which splashes the red and blue colors all over the place too. This timing is very deliberate. Of course, it was produced by Pepsi Productions. Again, pushing those same colors, tying together a lot of messaging. And that's what the Paris attacks were really at their heart about, to broadcast the message connected with the City of Light. And we've talked about that in previous videos as well. But it was at this time that we heard the calls for peace and safety. In this very narrow window, separated by only hours, really, we heard 6 major prominent calls for peace and safety. And that's what Scripture warns us to listen for. He said, when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh. And that implies you have to be keeping an eye on the enemy and watching them. You have to be wise as serpents, but as harmless as doves. And if you're not paying attention to what's going on in the world, you won't know what you should be doing in your life. You'll live as though life goes on. Well, life's not going on. I hate to burst your bubble, but sudden destruction is coming. And this is why we have to watch, be sober, and be vigilant so we can understand what we should be focusing on now, today, in light of eternity. Not our goals, not our desires, not our career. What does Christ want me to do in my life and in my family that will count for eternity? It's because we're called and commanded to watch, because there are consequences to this information. When we watch and understand what's going on in the world, we can be wise and live accordingly. But if we ignore and are willingly ignorant, then we will live foolishly. So once we heard the calls for peace and safety, right in the thick of all this messaging, right away we should know that from this point onward, we should expect sudden destruction incoming. We don't know the date, but we should be looking forward and expecting a D-Day, a day of destruction, a day of sudden destruction is coming after this point. It's not just going to magically disappear because it didn't happen on a day that we might think it might happen on. It's still going to come. Just when we think things are getting quiet or when there's a calm in the storm, it's not going to just evaporate and disappear. All this messaging Satan has been pushing his disciples for because he knows there is a D-Day. There is a day of destruction. They've put out the warning. Christ has unrestrained them, and they have been allowed to do that, which means pretty soon Christ is going to unrestrain the rest of it as well. Live accordingly. Now, there's a lot of other messaging since then, but in December, they put out the trailer for the Independence Day Resurgence, which immediately harkened back to the exact same messaging that we saw in the Black Knight Decoded, which referenced the Contact film, which dealt with signals and contacting aliens and interdimensional travel, but also pulled up all the emotional and psychological baggage from the Independence Day film, the first one, connected to that building and tying together multiple films. And it's, of course, interesting that the movie Contact, which starred Matthew McConaughey, who was in Interstellar, but the director of Contact was also the director of Back to the Future. And we saw a lot of symbolism that we've been talking about pointing toward this time. Satan has also been using that to get his disciples ready. There are so many messages and deep programming pointing toward just a very narrow window here. They know when the D-Day is coming. It's any day now. And we have to wake up and have a good dose of reality and stop living in some fantasy imagination world and realize we are in the thick of the days of Noah and Christ is about to return and he's about to be revealed. Will we be ready? Satan is going overboard trying to get his disciples ready. What are you doing? Then the very next day after that film came out, the Childhood's End series started, which was all about aliens coming and end-time deceptions and blatantly holding it in your face that all this is connected to demonic activity and Satan. And so much that's also tied into the Black Knight Decoded, aliens coming onto the scene. And it was also at this time, just right before Christmas, that the major media story came out about Columbia, Miss Columbia losing her crown. We talked a short video about that. That's major messaging. Columbia, which is America. It's always been known as Columbia, the District of Columbia. Columbia, America, is about to lose its crown. And we've seen that in a lot of messaging we've been pointing out previously too. America is the phoenix. It's going to be destroyed. It's going to be one of the three nations uprooted when the Antichrist comes onto the scene. And he wows the world with how powerful he is. But then it's also a reference to the Christians, the church, who did not press for the prize. They're going to lose their crown because they were lazy and they were foolish. And they will be left behind. And then we saw on December 25th, a lot of the messaging from the Dark Knight seemed to point toward that day, especially with that unique full moon that was on that day. So it seemed to be that they were using it as a marker to echo a lot of the messaging of the Dark Knight Decoded film and bring it back to the forefront and say, keep this in mind, we're literally at the last mile marker. And it's also tied into all the symbolism that takes place on the December 25th commemorations. And right around this time, too, over the past few days, we've also seen trailers come out for The Fifth Wave, which is a series that starts in just a couple of days. And it's produced by Columbia Pictures. Again, they're using that to push Columbia. Remember Columbia, how it fits in with all this other messaging. It's about to be destroyed. It's about to lose its crown. And just in the trailer, different harkens to the Independence Day film in a way. I'm pulling up a lot of that. But at the same time, and again, in this very narrow window, pointing out, and they specifically emphasize in the movie too, America, Columbia is the one that gets hit, and its light goes out. All this messaging is still going on. As we get closer to D-Day, the messaging has only intensified, and we've seen, since the calls for peace and safety have gone out, that we've seen other calls for apocalypse, the four horsemen. They know sudden destruction is coming, and he's reminding his disciples, this is coming, get ready. You know, this time, this holiday time that we find ourselves at now between Christmas and the New Year's. This is a perfect cover for the elite and those in the know to be out of the big cities and quote-unquote on vacation in a safe place. They know what's coming. They got a great cover for it too. So much symbolism going on right now and continuing to go on as they push toward that D-Day is almost here. And then just today, it leaked out that Christopher Nolan's new movie is probably going to be a World War II epic about the evacuation of Dunkirk. Again, emphasizing we're waiting for an evacuation. There's going to be an evacuation. There's going to be a major evacuation. And they use a big name, Christopher Nolan, who was the director of Interstellar. So they're immediately pulling up all those psychological anchors too, and that symbolism, saying we're waiting for an evacuation. Any day now, there's going to be evacuation that's tied to all this other messaging that we've been telling you about. And if you have not seen our video, Evacuation Procedures, watch it, because you are running out of time and Christ expects you to be where you should be and expects your light to be burning. But Christopher Nolan, who directed Interstellar, and there's so much messaging in that we talk about in our Time Centered in the Bible video too as well. Christopher Nolan, guess what else he directed? The Dark Knight trilogy. This messaging at this time is very deliberate. They're warning that there is an evacuation, and it's tied to the Dark Knight, the Black Knight. All of this is connected, and they're warning Satan's disciples that any day now, it's about to happen. And we don't know, but it looks like they've picked December 30th as a potential D-Day. And that should be considered plus or minus. That could go either way. But it appears that 1 year away from when they started the messaging, around this time period is when they expect the D-Day evacuation that is tied to them kicking off all their plans. That is what they're waiting for. The calls for peace and safety have gone out. Sudden destruction is coming any D-Day now. Are you ready? Now, Satan knows the evacuation is part of what's going on. And he's been including that aspect in his messaging almost from day one. All the way back at the halftime show. Right during the Dark Horse song, they illustrated the falling away, which is a military term. And we have our article, What is the Falling Away? Look in the description box for the link. There's going to be evacuation of God's diplomatic corps, those who are wise and those who are where they're supposed to be. In August, they put out a major video game about the rapture. You know, this isn't for Christians. This isn't for the Sunday school crowd, so to speak. Satan is creating this messaging for the lost, for the world, for his disciples. Because it's for them. It's to remind them, yes, there's going to be an evacuation of these folks, but once they're out of the way, we're going to have a heyday. And then there's also been the series, The Leftovers, which they just recently renewed for another series, and that made the news recently too as well. Again, them emphasizing people being taken away, and they always emphasize in these shows that there are certain quote-unquote Christians who are left behind. Because they know some Christians, the foolish Christians, who don't get ready, they're going to be left behind with the unbelievers and the hypocrites. And we talk about that in the videos. And then, of course, in the Back to the Future film, which pointed a lot toward in October, part of the rallying call for Satan's disciples, they even talked about the assembly of Christ being vacant. The true assembly, the true church, those who realize that they are the church and living like it, they're going to be gone when all these things really start hitting the wall, so to speak. And then in the Independence Day trailer that they released just a few days ago, they even emphasized it twice, showing you clearly, hearkening directly to the Black Knight decoded film even with the helicopter pad evacuation, saying there's going to be evacuation, and those whose white garments are spotted with the world, they're going to miss the boat. And he even literally had someone in the promotional media saying, repent while you can. The time has come. Satan, your accuser, the accuser of the brethren who stands before God day and night, has been giving notice to God's children, and one day he's going to hold it up in front of them and laugh at them and say, you do not love God, you're not going anywhere. You love this world, you are staying. When Christ returns, he's looking for faith. Shall he find faith? Is he going to find evidence of faith? Are you living like Christ is returning? If not, you're giving evidence to Satan, your accuser, that you do not love God, because you don't. You can play church, you can go to church, you can have a perfect church attendance, you could be in the choir, you could teach Sunday school, you could do all that stuff and still not love God. And in the letters to the 7 churches, Jesus Christ drove that home to the churches. He said, I'm not looking for hypocrite people who play church. I want people who love me. Watch our video, The Letters to the Seven Churches, and listen to the heart cry of God of what He calls you to be and what He is looking for when He returns. James 1:27, pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world. Don't gather up evidence that you love this world. Remember Lot's wife. Let go of the world. Examine your heart, examine your life, examine your home. Get on your knees and ask God for wisdom. God, show me what is in my life that is spotting me and soiling my life and that you do not approve of. Lord, I want to have a heart that pleases you, that walks with you. Lord, I want you to be number one in my life before me. This is what Christ is looking for when He returns. Who is living for Him? Who loves Him? And who shows it? Who is shining bright? To shine bright, you're going to have to overcome. You're going to have to cast off things. You're going to have to trim off things. You're going to have to set aside things, whatever is holding you back from burning bright. But friend, the hour is late. But Christ is only one prayer away. Regardless of how you've been living in the past, Christ calls you to have an ear to hear what the Spirit says to the churches. What Christ is calling toward His bride. Examine your life, examine your heart, ask God for wisdom, ask Him for strength and courage to do what He wants you to do in this late hour. Be sober, be vigilant, be ye ready, and overcome. Maranatha.